Could this be the year that we get some juice back in the rivalry? We'll talk about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever it is you get your podcast. Appreciate you hanging out with us today. TCU-Baylor this week. Our friends at FanDuel have Baylor as 3.5-point favorites early on in the week. Baylor is 4-4. They have won 2 in a row. TCU is 5-3. They've also won 2 in a row. Both teams have kind of gotten off the mat. Dave Aranda has been sort of on a boiling seat for a year plus, but they've defeated Oklahoma State, and before that, got a big win in Lubbock against Texas Tech. Sonny Dykes was out of a huge crossroads after that loss to Houston, but following the bye week. TCU has beaten Utah, and they've taken down Texas Tech as well at home. And so now rolling into Waco for a game on Saturday night. And I was thinking about this because I saw Baylor is going to honor their 2013 and 2014 conference title teams on Saturday. I think they're going to have them run with the line. And I don't know if they're doing any sort of other formal thing. And, of course, Art Briles will not be a part of that. I think they're doing like a off-campus kind of party on their own with him, but he won't be involved in any of the official ceremonies that'll be taking place. And it took me back to this rivalry had a ton of juice back in, really starting in 2012. Casey Paul Hall gets arrested. Trayvon Boykin comes in as QB. He made that start against Iowa State. Then he had a full week of practice, and they played Baylor at Floyd Casey. And they surprised Baylor, and they won that game pretty handily. Then in 2013, last game of the season for TCU on Black Friday, really good game. I thought Casey had Brandon Carter in the end zone for a touchdown. Ball's intercepted. Baylor wins. They hold on. They're going to win the conference. 2014, of course, was a 61-58 ball game. And there was a rivalry there already, right? Like, they didn't play for a long time because of had those back and forth years with RG3. TCU destroys Baylor in Fort Worth, and then they come down to Waco and they lose in a crazy game. And so that kind of got it going a little bit. Of course, TCU moves to the Big 12, but honestly, it was kind of one-sided for a while because TCU saw Baylor as one of the reasons why they got snubbed when the SWC broke up. So they had that kind of dislike and remorse for the Bears. But I don't think Baylor was really even thinking about it. Also, Baylor's football program was horrible for most of their time in the Big 12 up until that Briles era. So it wasn't like they were doing anything significant in the league, at least from a football perspective. So then they match up. They've got those few battles. And in 2014, of course, every week fans were lobbying for a playoff bid, right? And there was just back and forth about head-to-head versus resume and who had the better loss and all those things. And we all know how it panned out. Both teams ended up getting snubbed. But 2015 was another crazy, like, sleet, snow. TCU wins in double overtime, I believe, and got it done there. So for those few seasons, it was a great rivalry. And honestly, so much of it, part of it was, the teams were just legitimately good. Like the trajectory that both programs were on, it felt like it was going to become maybe not the top rivalry in the Big 12, but there were a few seasons where it was. Like that was the biggest game in this conference. It was even bigger than Texas and OU because those two schools were the most consistent and the best at what they did. That 2014, 2015, that 2-year period, right? They both had different identities. TCU had a defensive coach, and they ended up changing up their offense, but they were kind of hard-nosed, tough. Baylor was high-flying. They would have all these huge explosive plays. They scored 1 million points. And a lot of it also, just frankly, was driven by the fact that Gary Patterson and Art Briles hated each other. And it wasn't even like a sports kind of dislike. We still respect each other, but on this Saturday every year, we're going to get together and mix it up. It was a legitimate, these two guys did not like one another, right? Going back to 2013, when Ahmad Dixon got ejected for targeting, but he was like chilling on the sidelines, and Gary got mad about that, and he went after Art in the press conference. And then 2014, all the bad blood from that game and the playoff scenarios. And then 2015, guys, like, they had a very frosty handshake after not just because of the weather, but you could tell neither person wanted to be around each other. And I heard like legitimate chatter that at different Big 12 events that they were required to be at, when they would go do kind of the media thing, right, where every year you'd go and to ESPN and you'd go through what they call the car wash, where each coach would go sit with a sports center, and then he'd go to a radio show, and then he'd go on some other afternoon program, College Football Live, and talk about the upcoming season. That Art and Gary would be in a hallway together, and they wouldn't even acknowledge each other. Like, they did not want to be associated with one another. And of course, we all know what happened with Art and the scandal. He gets let go. Gary continues to coach. But after he left, it was almost like the next few coaches made a point to kind of go out of their way to give Gary respect and his flowers to a certain extent. Jim Grobe was there for a year, but I remember hearing him talk about how they were friends and how much he respected him as a defensive coach, and he was a defensive guy too, and they got along fine. And then Matt Rule was there, and he was sort of the same way. He was always giving love to Gary when it was time, on game week when they would play each other. He was very complimentary of TCU's players. I think part of that was Matt had an ambition to be in the NFL, and at the time, Jalen Rager and a couple other guys were going to be NFL guys, and he wanted to make sure that he had good relationships with all those dudes when and if they made it to the next level. And in 2019, which is the one game TCU's lost in the last 9 years against Baylor, Max was in, right? But they lose in triple overtime. And I remember after the game, Gary saying, it feels like the program has respect for one another again. And he was referring to Matt Rule and his relationship with him. And of course, Gary, that transition happened. Sonny Dykes is here now. Dave Aranda's here now. And honestly, last few seasons, like, it's still a rivalry. It's still the game that I want to win as a TCU fan more than any other game. Part of that's just because of my family ties. I have family and a lot of friends that went to Baylor, so it's just good for my general mental health and sanity. But also, like, it's just, I think it's the best and biggest rivalry that TCU has. And it's one that makes the most sense because for a long time, Baylor wanted to have a rivalry with like Texas and Texas A&M, but those fan bases and those schools didn't like reciprocate that type of respect for that program. They just saw Baylor as another team that they beat. Of course, that script got flipped a little bit, when Baylor was so good, but you know what I mean. And TCU kind of the same way. They were in conference purgatory for years. So they had rivalries in the Mountain West and Conference USA and all those things, but it was a lot of schools that were proximity-wise very far away, and so it was hard to really, get into it each and every year, even though Utah, they had some great battles with them. BYU, same thing. But the schools are close together. They're both private institutions. They're very similar in a lot of ways, and it would make sense for it to just be a great rivalry. And one thing that needs to happen is that both teams need to be good again, because it's been a long time since both teams were good at the same time. There's been an up and down nature to both programs, and they haven't met on the same level in a while. Last year, they were both bad, and so they met up in Fort Worth, and it was a matchup of two teams that weren't very good, and TCU won that ball game handily. Back in 2021, TCU pulls off that huge, or 2021, TCU pulls off that huge upset that started the Chandler Morris folklore that lasted for like 3 years because he had that amazing game against Baylor, and that kept Baylor out of the playoffs. And that was awesome, man. That's one of my favorite, like, one great thing about college football is there's like random moments, random regular season games that if you're a locked in fan, dialed in, you can enjoy forever. I'll still go back and watch highlights of Chandler Morris like that Baylor defense, and it puts a smile on my face. Shad Banks getting that interception, right? It was all great. That was an awesome game. But again, it was a game where like the stakes were not the same for TCU as they were for Baylor. But it was cool that we ruined their season. That was awesome. Back in 2020, that was the COVID year. Neither team was really good. 2019, Baylor was good, but TCU wasn't, and so on and so forth. And so both teams have either been have been vacillating between mediocre or good, and neither team has been good at the same time. And I'm not going to go as far as to say these two teams are great, but for the first time in a while, there's some legitimate momentum for both programs at the same time. Baylor's won a couple in a row. They've got a night game at home where they're honoring one of the best teams in the history of their program. TCU is 5-3. Sonny Dykes has suddenly got this group playing well again. And in the new Big 12, there's not a lot of these games that are just great historic rivalries. Obviously, Utah and BYU, right? Iowa State and Kansas State, Farmageddon. But I do think there's a legitimate chance that TCU and Baylor could become, if both programs kind of get up to where they can be, it can become the standard bearer for the league, the game that everybody circles and says, this is the one that you want to watch because it has that rivalry magic that you love. It has two programs that are consistently very good. But both programs have to get good at the same time. So I'm excited to watch this one because I feel like for the first time in a while, both teams are kind of on the same level and they're trending up instead of trending down. And it's been a long time since that's happened. So I just think there's a great opportunity for both schools to build something here that could continue for a long time and be like, I would love it if the game was the last week of the season. I don't really know why that hasn't happened since they've been playing on a regular basis, but put it on rivalry week. I know there's a lot of great games, right? It's not the Iron Bowl. It's not Michigan, Ohio State, but there's legitimate history here. The two fan bases don't like each other. And if both programs are good, then it's going to be a great football game. And even if they're not, there's been some exciting, like crazy, 2022, the Bazooka game where Griffin Kell runs out there and kicks a field goal. I mean, Baylor played their tails off that week at home. It looked like they were going to upset the Frogs and end their undefeated season, but they didn't. TCU comes back with a last-second drive. They kick that field goal and that crazy, let's sprint out there and just put it up in the air and get through the uprights. There's been a lot of great history just in the past decade. And I think this rivalry can really get back to the place. I think there's a middle ground between, those seasons in 2013 through 2015 where the schools and the teams seem to legitimately like hate each other, and just a great, like, strong dislike for one another, respect for who the other program is. But hey, when we meet on this Saturday each year, we're going to get after it. So I'm excited to watch this game this week. Should be fun. We'll have more previews all throughout the week here on Locked on Horned Frogs. We'll take a break when we come back. This TCU defense quietly feels like they're improving. Andy Avalos has them playing better. Are they turning the corner? Are they at the place where they need to be moving forward? Locked on Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here each and every day. All right, time to talk about one of our great sponsors. It's time for Roy. Roy stands for Return on You. And it's time for our player of the week. Our Roy player of the week this week is Savion Williams. Savion Williams had an outstanding game. Another week where he led the team in rushing yards, also had that 73-yard touchdown reception where he lined up in the backfield, ran out there, made a great catch, took it to the end zone. Josh Hoover found him there. Good play design by Kendall Briles. All that was amazing. So Savion Williams, our Roy player of the week. You can download the Roy app and you can donate. Here's what it is. It's NIL, but it's directly for the fans. You can donate directly to players and help them stay at your school, help them feel appreciated. It allows fans to get directly involved in name, image, and likeness. Download the Roy app today. You can do it in the App Store or Google Play. Our Roy player of the week, Savion Williams. Of course, as I was talking about this game and this rivalry week, it occurred to me again. It's just so bizarre, man. Kendall Briles is going to be on the opposite sideline. They're honoring the teams where he was part of the coaching staff. That coaching staff is not publicly getting acknowledged because of everything that happened in the past. But he'll be there coaching TCU. Gary was a consultant on Baylor's staff this offseason, and then he weirdly, in the middle of the offseason, said, you know what, I think my time here is done. And him and Dave parted ways. Don't know what the behind the music documentary is going to be like on that. Or if there was any juice, maybe it was just simple as Gary saying, you know what, I don't really want to work anymore and I don't have to. So peace. But it's all so weird, man. It's just, yeah. There's Kaz Kazadi, who was a huge staple as a strength and conditioning coach at Baylor. He's at TCU. It's very strange. But I do think that, that at the rivalry at its peak was a lot of fun. And I'd love to get back to where those programs, it just means that much. Like the game means a lot. There's high stakes to it. Hopefully the two teams can get to a place where they can do that again. So talking about the TCU defense, because in Diablo's last 2 weeks, it's been super impressive. What they did against Utah was great. Held them to 7 points. Now, they kept Mekhi Bernard in check and that run game and just were able to slow him down and force Isaac Wilson to pass. He wasn't able to do that. So it was an impressive moment, impressive game. But at the same time, we kind of know what was happening behind the scenes. With that Utah team, they're going to lose Houston next week. But Texas Tech, legitimately a good offense. And Baron Morton had a good year. He gets injured or banged up. Will Hammond comes in, and he surprised this TCU defense. But, I mean, you look at the drive summaries. TCU forces a punt on their first possession of the game on defense. They force a field goal later on. They force a punt again. They finally give up a touchdown, but it was after that strip sack of Josh Hoover where Tech had the ball at the 4-yard line, and they made a stand. Like, they forced a 4th and goal. Tech decides to trot the field goal team out there, and they run a fake field goal. And that was a huge moment in that game. I think, honestly, like, it was 14-3. TCU turns the ball over. Now it's 14-10, and suddenly the momentum just really swung in a big way. But, again, the defense, they made a stop. Special teams unit gets surprised by, like, fake field goal. Tech executed it well. They scored the touchdown, and now it's 14-10. And then the defense started to struggle a little bit. Gave up another touchdown in the ensuing possession, a field goal. They did force a punt before halftime that was big. In the second half, early in the second half, had some issues. Will Hammond gets going. After a Josh Hoover interception, they go down and score again. So it's 31-14. But once it got to 31-14, they only gave up 3 points the rest of the game. And they were able to get that fumble late. It just feels to me like they are getting closer to, the TCU defense is getting closer to what we thought they could be at the beginning of the year. If, the best case scenario played out. Which is they're not a great unit, right? Like, they're not going to come out each and every week and hold teams to 13 points. That's just not what they're going to do right now with the personnel they have. But they're getting timely stops. They're forcing turnovers. And honestly, in that Tech game, the offense put them in a horrible position multiple times, really let them down in the first half after those first 2 touchdowns by not finding ways to score and putting them in tough situations. And the defense held up. I mean, they let Tech build that lead to a certain extent, but then they bowed up and made stops and forced turnovers. The Deal brothers have been outstanding. Devin Deal's been incredible. Rushing the pass the last few weeks. Marcus Deal has stepped up in a big way since he's gotten more snaps. Young player that you like to see. Get out there and mix it up. I also think they're doing some things at corner that have been smart, rotating. JT brought now the game a little more, giving Channing Canada some more snaps, giving Javon McIver some snaps, just to give teams a different look and not allow them to just kind of pick on one side of the secondary over and over again. Linebacker-wise, I like what I've seen from Caleb Laramzor. Johnny Hodges has been kind of a mixed bag, but they figured out how to make this work in a way to win games. After going through that stretch of UCF, SMU, and really against Kansas, they played well, but those 2 weeks specifically where it was just, man, touchdown after touchdown. And Houston, I thought, they didn't play super well, but they got some stops when they needed to. It was just the offense could never get going, and so it made it tough. Here's the bottom line. Like, teams have identity. They have a way that they need to play. TCU is an offensive-minded team right now. That's what they're best at. That's where their most talent is. That's where the coaching staff, I don't know if it's the most talented part of the coaching staff, but they have the resources that they need outside of offensive line play, which I know is a big deal. They found some ways to work around that. They can't keep turning the ball over and putting this defense in bad spots. I've talked about that the last couple of days, but it's just the truth. You have to find a way to give your defense an opportunity to continue to make plays and get off the field and not continually put them in situations where they're having to make stops in short fields. Because this is not Iowa, right? Like, this is not how they're made up right now. Maybe they'll get to a place where, hopefully they'll get to a place in the next few years where they are a group that can just shut teams down. But at the moment, it's more about, okay, can we slow the other offense down? Can we force some field goals when teams get in the red zone? And allow our offense to be efficient, score touchdowns, and take over the game. But I've been super impressed with what they've done post-bye week. And this will be a test against Baylor. Baylor's figured some things out on offense, and Sawyer Robertson took over as a quarterback. He's been outstanding. They're running the ball well with Pendergrass, with Bryce Foster. I might have got his name wrong. The Franklin running back, Franklin, Texas. Not sure how many of you are following the Franklin, Texas Lions, but that's a really good 4A football program in Central Texas. But they've got some good backs. Josh Cameron's a good player. They've got some skill guys that can go. Monterey Baldwin, Sawyer Robertson's been throwing it all over the place. So this is going to be a huge test for this team. And they have to find a way to get stops. And the offense has to hold up there into the bargain too. But I wanted to point that out because I've been impressed lately with what TCU has done defensively. And they need to keep it up. When we come back, we'll get into some of your thoughts from yesterday's show. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. We do it here every day. FanDuel. It's one of our great sponsors. They've been rocking with us since I started here on the network. And they always have great deals for you. FanDuel app or FanDuel.com. One $5 bet gets you $150 in bonus bets. Again, that's one $5 bet. You get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. As I said earlier, that Baylor line, Bears 3.5-point favorites right now, according to our friends at FanDuel. Also, Major League Baseball might be wrapping up soon, but the World Series is still going on for now. Dodgers have a 3-0 lead in that series. NBA is in full swing. NHL's happening. College football, college basketball is right around the corner. Great time to be a sports fan. Great time to check out FanDuel and everything that they offer. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. It's where the game starts. So yesterday I talked about Savion Williams, TCU getting him more integrated in the offense, finding ways to use him effectively, and then also the turnover issues. I discussed that as well. Josh Hoover having problems protecting the ball. Kelly Norcross says, I'll never forget Savion's catch at the end of the Baylor game in 2022 on that last drive before the quick field goal. The ball pops off his hands, but he reaches out and gets it. It was a cold day, and we were right in front of where he made that catch amongst all the Baylor folk. Yeah, that's a good pull. That's an outstanding moment. And I said, like, Savion in 2022, the reason there was so much hype around him the last couple of years is because he was a great complementary piece in that offense. Obviously, Quentin Johnston was the dude, but he was a fantastic number 2 option. And he would go up and get those 50-50 balls. But I remember that play you're talking about. Max hits Tay Barber on first down to get a first down around midfield. And then he gets the ball to Savion on like a 9-yard comeback pattern, hit him in the chest, bounced up, but he stayed with it, concentrated, caught the ball. And that was a huge play because it allowed Max to scramble on that. I think it was 2 plays later on 3rd and 1. He breaks through the line, scrambles, gets in field goal range, and then it sets them up to kick the field goal and walk it off. I mean, Savion's been an outstanding player here, but it's always kind of felt like, man, if you could find a way to really reach his full potential, then he could do some special things. And it seems like they're finally building towards that as they get him more involved in the run game. And I've said for a long time, I want to see him in like the screen game, that type of stuff. And they've done that too, but it's really as a running back where he's been a special player. But yeah, he was outstanding in that final drive against the Bears. And that was a huge play they had to have. And one of those many magical moments of the 2022 season that Sonny Dykes and company is trying to get back to, frankly. Someone else asked, what do you think about modifying the running back to include using a fullback? Well, I guess the problem with that, and I saw another commenter say it in the YouTube comments, the first issue with that is TCU doesn't really have a true fullback. They don't have anybody on the roster who would fit that mold. Dominic Johnson is a big running back from Arkansas who they've used in some fullback roles at times. Chase Curtis might be a dude, but he's hurt right now. Like, that's another guy that comes to mind as someone who could possibly do that. But my main response to that is, I mean, I think in certain situations it's great. I feel like having another lead blocker is helpful. You still have to execute, though. And they're just not really built to do that. Like, they're not going to get in the I formation. As long as Kendall Browse is a coordinator, that's not something they're gonna be about. Now, I do think there's some cool stuff they could do, like motion-wise and misdirection-wise from 2-back sets. Putting Savion in the backfield with Cam Cook or with Jeremy Payne, with Trent Battle could be really intriguing from the aspect of what you could do in the run game, but also the passing game, matching Savion up with linebackers and safeties in space and allowing him to go make plays. I think all that would be outstanding. but a traditional fullback, I don't really see that being in the cards. And then Jim Norris says, I need to make it a priority to lobby on behalf of the 2014 team at TCU for not being honored last week. So I did a segment on that last week, Jim. Yeah, it's disappointing to me. I mean, I don't fully understand it. I know Matt Engel wrote a column about what he believes the reasons why are. One of them being Gary Patterson and still having kind of a frosty relationship with administration, which I think that one's silly. Like, he's a legend here. I mean, it ended poorly. I get it, but he built this thing. He should be able to be recognized and honored on the field. That's not a big deal to me. And then also Trayvon Boykin in his past and the arrests that he's had after his time at TCU. But I said this last week. I think there's a way that you can honor those guys publicly, and they deserve that. I mean, the whole team deserves that. There were a lot more players and coaches that were involved with those teams than just those two guys. And they were a huge part of it too, and they deserve to have that recognition. But it's about that whole group. I saw Josh Carraway, who played defensive end on those teams, obviously, and he put out, like, I didn't do anything. And, I mean, I get that sentiment of, like, there's a lot of guys on that roster who still have great relationships with TCU and don't have anything in their past that would cause any PR issues. And all those players deserve to be recognized. For my money, that 2014 team was the best team in TCU history. Now, I might be a little biased because I was a student then. I think you're sort of nostalgic or partial to the teams that were there when you were in school. But, I mean, they were so talented just everywhere. And I don't have to run it down to you guys, but, offensively they were stacked. They had skilled players everywhere that could play. Boykin was an incredible quarterback. Josh Docks and Aaron Green. Defensively, they hit people hard. They were so fast. They floated the ball. They made plays. I mean, they just did everything well. And so, yeah, I'm with you, Jim. I think the team itself needs to be recognized. I feel like it's kind of silly that they weren't, but I understand the PR issues behind it, but I think you should work past that and recognize those players for what they did on the field, because that's what it's about. It's about what they did on the field. Tomorrow might be a weird day schedule-wise. I'll try to let you guys know. You can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, @SimcockSteven. We're traveling back from family vacation, so it's going to be a long travel day. I'm going to try to have an episode up in the afternoon, but I'll keep you guys updated as to what is going to happen. But thank you for tuning in today. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.